June 2020, the Galwan Valley in Ladakh, India. Indian and Chinese troops clash. Did they fire guns? Nope. They brought out clubs. They threw rocks. They literally fought barehanded. The soldiers of the two most populous nations on Earth, both nuclear-armed superpowers, literally beat each other with sticks in the mountains at an altitude of 4,000 meters. It might sound almost comical that night 20 Indian soldiers died. The Chinese took casualties too, though Beijing never officially confirmed the exact numbers. There's a very specific reason two nuclear powers resorted to swinging clubs. There's actually a bilateral agreement in that region. No firearms are to be discharged near the line of actual control LAC. Why? Because one single gunshot could instantly spiral into an all-out war. So, they brought sticks. To avoid a modern nuclear apocalypse, they fought like it was the Middle Ages. But behind that bizarre scene lies a very, very old story about geography. Let's pull up the map. India and China. Exactly how close are these two countries? As the crow flies, it's not far at all. From northern India to western China, it's just a straight shot of a few hundred kilometers. But do you know what's sitting right in between them? The Himalayas. Mount Everest is right there, 8,849 meters above sea level, the highest peak on Earth. And it's not just Everest. The Himalayas have 14 peaks that stand over 8,000 meters tall. It's a concentration of massive mountains you won't find anywhere else on the planet. This mountain range is 2,400 kilometers long, stretching all the way from Pakistan in the west to Myanmar in the east. And the width? It averages over 200 kilometers across. The Himalayas aren't just mountains. They are an entire world, practically a continent unto themselves. And this colossal, impenetrable barrier has stood right between these two civilizations for thousands of years. Let's look at how civilizations are forged in human history. Civilizations grow through exchange. People move. Goods move. Ideas move. And that's how cultures evolve. One of the primary reasons ancient Greek civilization was so incredibly brilliant is because it constantly interacted with countless other cultures across the open Mediterranean Sea. Mesopotamia, Egypt, Persia, they all mixed, clashed, and fused across that water, but the Himalayas did the exact opposite. They blocked exchange, completely and utterly. If you were in the Indian subcontinent, down where the Indus and Ganges rivers flow, just trying to cross over the Himalayas meant risking your life. For merchants, armies, or messengers, it was just too brutally hard to get over those peaks. As a result, the Indian and Chinese civilizations grew up for thousands of years, barely even knowing the other existed, on the exact same Asian continent. They created two completely different universes. Let's look at just how different they became. Starting with language, Chinese is a tonal language. The exact same sound means something entirely different depending on your pitch. They use ideograms, where a single character holds an entire standalone meaning. Indian languages are completely different. The languages derived from Sanskrit are alphabetic. They use phonetic script. Hindi, Bengali, Telugu, Marathi. India has 22 official languages alone. The fundamental writing systems aren't even on the same planet. Religion grew up completely differently. 2. In India, Hinduism was born. Buddhism was born. Jainism was born. These religions evolved entirely around concepts like personal liberation, karma, and reincarnation. The core idea is that the universe is cyclical. In China, Confucianism and Taoism took root. Confucianism emphasizes human relationships, social order, and loyalty to the state. It highly values vertical hierarchy, father and son, ruler and subject, teacher and student. The ethics of relationships are the core. If Indian thought bounces between the universe and the individual, Chinese thought bounces between society and the state. Same continent, but the very direction of their thinking is completely opposite. Even their philosophical traditions are different. Indian philosophy digs deep into the nature of existence, the insight that Atman, the individual, soul and Brahman, the ultimate reality, are one. The idea that the visible world might just be my illusion. It's incredibly abstract and metaphysical. Chinese philosophy tackles the real, tangible world. How do we govern a nation? How do people live together in harmony? Confucius barely even talked about heaven or the gods. He focused intensely on how to live in this world. If Indian philosophy is looking up at the sky, Chinese philosophy is looking down at the earth. Where did that massive difference come from? The Himalayas. Because one massive mountain range completely blocked the way. These two civilizations built their entire systems of thought in total isolation, completely unfunded by one another. What if the Himalayas weren't there? What if they had traded ideas early on? We'd probably be looking at a completely different tradition of Asian thought today. The Himalayas aren't just a geographical barrier. They are a borderline of human thought. But there's one incredibly fascinating exception to this rule. Buddhism. Buddhism was born in India. In the 5th century BCE, the Buddha attained enlightenment in northern India, and Buddhism actually managed to cross the Himalayas. How? Through the Silk Road. It didn't go straight over the mountains. It took a massive detour completely around Central Asia, through the western regions, and eventually trickled into China around the 1st century. But the Buddhism that arrived in China changed completely. Indian Buddhism mixed with Chinese Confucianism and Daoism, giving birth to Chan and Buddhism. When it eventually crossed over to Japan, it morphed again into Japanese Zen. The exact same teachings of the Buddha arrived in China looking entirely different simply because of the massive detour it had to take around the Himalayas. Geography literally filtered the philosophy. That incredibly long, winding journey transformed the religion itself. Geography doesn't just stop the movement of people. It filters, works, and transforms the movement of ideas. Mine is all right. Let's jump to the modern era. Two civilizations that lived completely ignorant of each other for thousands of years, suddenly solidified into modern nations. India gains independence in 1947. The Chinese Communist Party establishes the PRC in 1949. They are both born as modern nation-states. And for the very first time, they actually had to seriously look at their shared border. But there was a huge problem. The borders around the Himalayas weren't clear at all. Why? Because for thousands of years, whilst nobody lived up in those mountains, there was never a reason to draw a firm line on them. The Himalayas themselves were just the natural boundary. But when India and China both put out their own modern maps, the maps didn't match. Our own Madhya Pradesh, I region in northeast India, India says it's theirs. China calls it Zhangnan, South Tibet, and claims it as theirs. Aksai Chin, high altitude plateau east of Kashmir. China actually controls it. India claims it's their land. The total area of the land both sides are currently arguing over is literally larger than the entire country of South Korea, and they still haven't agreed on exactly where that border is. 1962. The two countries went to war. The Sino-Indian War. Chinese troops pushed over the Himalayas and poured down into the Indian side. The Indian army completely collapsed. India's Prime Minister at the time, Nehru, was absolutely shocked. He honestly believed the Himalayas were an impenetrable natural shield, but the Chinese military crossed it. They were routes perfectly acclimatized to high-altitude warfare. The war ended in a totally one-sided victory for China. China took Aksai Chin, and they still control it today. The trauma of that brutal defeat left a deep, lingering scar on India's foreign policy. Even now, the reason India will never, ever fully trust China, the reason India formed the Quad Security Alliance with the US, Japan, And Australia? The roots of all of that tie straight back to the memory of 1962. And that brings us right back to the Galwan Valley in 2020. The soldiers who fought with clubs that night. The reason they were fighting wasn't just over a few kilometers of frozen rocks. Behind that brawl is a massive gap between two civilizations that grew up utterly oblivious to one another. Two nations with different languages, different philosophies, completely different worldviews. Finally, seriously colliding the moment the Himalayan barrier started to blur. Because the Himalayas weren't just holding back armies, they were holding back misunderstandings, holding back mistrust, holding back conflict. The mountains aren't physically shrinking, obviously, but with airplanes, paved roads, and modern communications, the psychological height of the Himalayas is plummeting. For the first time in history, these two civilizations are actually looking each other straight in the face. And let's just say, the first impression hasn't been great. Let's go one layer deeper here. The story of Tibet. Tibet is just north of the Himalayas. Its average elevation is 4,500 meters. They call it the roof of the world. In 1950, China annexed Tibet. The Dalai Lama fled to India in 1959, and even today, the Tibetan government in exile of Dharmas. India. Do you know why China holds on to Tibet with such an iron grip? It's not just a greedy land grab. There's a massive strategic reason. The major rivers of Asia originate on the Tibetan plateau. The Yellow River, the Yangtze, the Mekong, the Salween, the Brahmaputra. It is literally the primary water source for over 1 billion people across China, India, and Southeast Asia. Controlling Tibet means controlling the upstream valve for Asia's water, and militarily, the Tibetan Plateau is China's western shield. If they lose Tibet, India could directly threaten China's western flank from high ground. The reason China will absolutely never give up Tibet is 100% geography, and the reason India harbors the Dalai Lama and allows the government in exile. Same thing. The Tibet issue is the ultimate diplomatic pressure card they can keep in their back pocket against China. Two countries separated by the Himalayas have been fighting a decades-long cold war over the land sitting right on top of them. Let's zoom out and look at the big picture. Where is the most important geopolitical competition of the 21st century going to happen? A lot of experts say the Indo-Pacific, that massive space where the US, China, India, and Japan are all entangled. A dead center of that competition is the relationship between India and China. In 2023, India officially overtook China to become the most populous country in the world. Their economic growth is skyrocketing. Their military is beefing up. China cannot ignore India anymore. India fears China, but desperately wants to look them in the eye as an absolute equal. These two nations will sit together at BARICS championing the developing world, and then literally pick up clubs at their border. It is a crazy mix of simultaneous cooperation and conflict. And at the very bottom of that incredibly complex relationship are the Himalayas, the massive gap created by thousands of years of isolation, the scars of the 1962 war, the strategic tug of war over Tibet, and the absurd reality that they still don't even agree on where their borders are. The misunderstandings that the Himalayas used to keep separated are now piling up right at their foothills. I'll end with this thought on civilization. Human history produced two civilizations that built the deepest philosophical traditions on Earth. One was born in the Ganges River basin Indian civilization, wrestling with the most fundamental questions. What is existence? Who am I? How do we escape suffering? The other was born in the Yellow River basin Chinese civilization, wrestling with the most practical questions. How should we live? How do we govern? How do we achieve harmony? Both civilizations are magnificent. Both are incredible legacies of humanity. But the fact that these two giants spent thousands of years completely oblivious to each other wasn't a choice either of them made. It was the Himalayas' choice. The mountains split the two worlds apart, forced them to create different languages, different religions, different philosophies. And now, for the first time ever, those two worlds are the exact same stage in the exact same era, ready to compete. Will that meeting end in cooperation or collision? Nobody really knows yet, but we do know one thing. If you want to understand that meeting, you shouldn't be looking at the names of their leaders. You need to look at the height of the Himalayas, 8,849 meters. The history forged by that sheer altitude is still unfolding right at this very second. High up in the Galwan Valley at 4,000 meters, right in the hands of the soldiers holding those clubs. Minus in our next and final chapter, Part 8, we're going to talk about ice. Up in the Arctic, where almost no one is looking, the battle for the next century's hegemony has quietly begun. Because superpowers' geopolitical desires are melting out into the open just as fast as global warming is melting that ice. I'll see you in the finale, Part 8.